Okay, so ready to like jump into some Victorian lit?
Yeah, let's do it.
We've got some excerpts here from Dr. Jasvant Rathod's study guide.
Right.
And I think it'd be really cool to kind of go through these and just see what we find, you know?
Yeah, I mean, these are like the big names, We're talking Mill, Tennyson, Keats,
Yeah.
Wilde, Dickens, Hardy.
Yeah, so it's like a who's who of like Victorian lit.
Absolutely.
And I think it's interesting because like these authors were dealing with, society, individual struggles, even like what is art even,
Yeah.
So like these are questions that we're still dealing
Well,
with.
absolutely. I mean, they were writing in a time of like huge change, the Industrial Revolution, scientific discoveries, all these like social norms were being challenged.
Right.
And they weren't afraid to like tackle those changes head on in their writing.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that makes them so interesting to read even today.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's start with this first one here.
Okay.
Um, John Stuart Mill and the Subjugation of Women.
Oh. 1869.
Hmm.
Okay, but some of this stuff, it's like ripped from today's headlines.
I know, right? It's like
Yeah.
he was writing for today.
Right.
I mean, he was really ahead of his time.
Yeah, he was arguing for like equal rights way back then.
Exactly. Not
Yeah.
just like equal rights, but he was questioning the whole idea that women were just naturally less capable.
Yeah. Right.
He was saying, no, it's all about how they're raised and the
Yeah.
opportunities they get.
Yeah, it's like conditioning.
Social conditioning.
Yeah, not like something that's like inherent.
Yeah. And that was like radical back then.
It was?
And honestly, it still sparks debate now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, we've got Tennyson's Maud, which is a monodrama.
Ooh, yes.
And so what is a monodrama?
So basically, it's like a whole poem that's like a one-person show.
Okay.
Like imagine an actor on stage just pouring their heart out, anxieties, fears, everything.
Right.
It's like that, but on the page,
Okay. And Maud is a really good example because it goes into like the dark side of love, obsession, even madness.
Wow.
Like a psychological thriller, but in verse.
Okay, I got to check that one out.
Yeah, it's really good.
Okay, switching gears a little bit, let's talk about Keats.
Okay.
There's this line from Ode on Melancholy that the study guide mentions.
Yeah.
It says, she dwells with beauty, beauty that must die.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's just so, like, hauntingly beautiful.
It is. It really captures that like bittersweet feeling,
Yeah.
Like that beauty is fleeting. And that's kind of tied into his whole idea of negative capability.
Right. What is that exactly?
So it's like this ability to hold on to like contradictory ideas,
Okay.
like beauty and pain or joy and sorrow without trying to like force them to resolve.
So it's just like being okay with the fact that things are complicated.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's like so relevant to life.
So-
We're always trying to like find easy answers and fix everything. But sometimes it's more about just like sitting with the uncertainty,
Yeah.
embracing the ambiguity.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard though, right?
It is. It is.
But I think there's wisdom in it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, speaking of like challenging norms, we've got to talk about Oscar Wilde
Oh, yeah.
and his art for art's sake thing.
Right.
Like he was such a provocateur,
It was.
basically saying that art doesn't have to be useful or moral.
Mm-hmm.
It just has to be beautiful.
Yeah, he was all about aestheticism, like elevating beauty above everything else.
Right.
And that was a big challenge to Victorian society.
Yeah, they were all about like morality and practicality.
Exactly. And so Wilde comes along and he's like, no, art should just be beautiful.
Right.
But it makes you think, like, can art ever really be separated from its context,
That's a good question.
Even if the artist just wants to create beauty,
Right.
can the viewer ever just, like, experience it purely without thinking about the world around them?
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It is. It's a really interesting debate, though.
It is for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so from aesthetics,
Yeah.
let's go to like the gritty realities of Dickens.
Oh, yeah.
Like A Tale of Two Cities starts with, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times.
Mhm.
I mean, that's like the ultimate description of any era.
It is. It's so true. And Dickens was so good at capturing that, the contradictions of his time.
Yeah.
He gave a voice to the people who were usually ignored, the poor, the forgotten.
Right.
And he wasn't afraid to show the ugly side of London, too.
Yeah.
The poverty, the injustice.
Right alongside all the grandeur and progress.
Exactly. He showed it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of capturing emotions, we've got to mention Wordsworth.
Oh, yeah.
He famously said that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's what all these authors were doing.
I think so too. Wordsworth really believed in the power of personal experience, like
Mhm.
letting your emotions flow freely and then reflecting on them later. Yeah.
And that's something we can all relate to, you know?
Totally.
Whether we write it down or not, we all have those moments where we're just overwhelmed with feelings.
Right.
And sometimes looking back on those moments, we find meaning in them,
Yeah.
even beauty.
Yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
Okay, so here's something that kind of surprised me in the study guide.
Oh, what's that?
The connection between Keats and the femme fatale in his poetry.
Oh, interesting.
Like, I always think of Keats as this, like, romantic, nature-loving poet.
Right.
So where do femme fatales fit into that?
What's interesting, right? Because the femme fatale is this archetype of a beautiful woman who's also dangerous.
Right.
Like sirens luring sailors to their deaths.
Yeah.
And Keats explores that theme in some of his poems like La Belle Dame sans Merci and Lamia.
Uh-huh.
It's like a reminder that even the most beautiful things can have a dark side.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay, and finally, we land on Thomas Hardy,
Oh, yes.
whose novels are known for their, let's say, less than cheerful outlook. Right. Not exactly lighthearted reads.
No, not really.
Yeah.
In Jude the Obscure,
Mm-hmm.
which is already pretty tragic,
Yeah.
there's even a character named Little Time.
Oh, wow.
Talk about foreshadowing.
Right. Well, Hardy was really interested in social commentary,
Right.
But he was also exploring these bigger questions of fate and free will.
Right.
And Jude the Obscure really digs into those themes, It shows how social class and expectations can really limit your choices. And the character Little Time is like this really poignant reminder that life is short.
Yeah.
And a lot of times our choices are limited by things we can't control.
Right.
It makes you think about what forces are shaping your own life,
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
Wow, so we've journeyed through Victorian England,
We have
explored some like really grand ideas.
big questions.
Yeah, and maybe even felt a shiver or two down our spines along the way.
Uh-huh, maybe.
But here's a question for you to ponder.
Okay.
If you could sit down for tea with one of these authors, who would it be?
That's a tough one.
And what would be like the one burning question you'd ask them? Let us know.
Yeah, let us know.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, it was.
Always a good time talking about Victorian lit.
Yeah, for sure.